The Institute of Human Observation, Volume 1. Lilith was a vet for 33 years. She said she never got used to cutting into something living. She still did it, she just never liked it. She refused to read these reports, said there are some things you never need to know, and that she already knew what humans are capable of doing to one another. I agree, but I read them all, and if they're true, they scare me to death. Lilith found this farmhouse after we retired. She loved it right off the bat, and the house did have good bones. We've made it our own, and we couldn't be happier now. When we bought it from the bank, there were still books on the shelves, mainly physics and chemistry. The fireplace mantel still had antlers and bones and odd round rocks and arrowheads displayed on it. The furniture had all been covered as if the last occupants knew no one would be living here for some time. We boxed it all up and donated it. Most of it. We found two things that were different. One bedroom was bare, unlike the rest of the house. There was only a stripped mattress on the floor and an old Singer sewing machine in the corner. Atop the sewing machine was a sealed gallon mason jar that contained a human fetus floating in some kind of viscous yellowish liquid. Premature stillbirth, perhaps. The head looked abnormally large, and the little guy slumped down chin to chest at the bottom of the jar as if passed out drunk. Odd, though, and a little disconcerting to say the least. Lilith certainly didn't appreciate it. We buried it out in the back field, said a prayer. Also, in the basement, buried beneath coal at the base of the chute. It was one of those old coal chutes accessible from the outside of the house at the foundation, a trap door for the delivery man. Down there, buried beneath a pile of coal, I found a wooden box. The box was lined with plastic, perhaps to prevent damage or mold. It contained some file folders, and in the files were reports of some kind, perhaps for a coroner or a doctor or something. There were just first-person statements, really, but they were dated, and the pages had letterhead from something called the Institute of Human Observation. Perhaps they were fake, but here's what they said. The Institute of Human Observation, Meredith Sessions, Assistant Deputy Coroner, Montrose, Colorado, April 2, 1989. I will not speculate on any of this. I'm going to say that right up front. Officially, this John Doe died of drowning. His body was confiscated by the state and processed elsewhere. But because you know Stanley, and because Stanley asked me personally to talk to you, I will tell you what I saw. I was assistant coroner on call that night, and the body was found in a concrete spillway along the South Canal just outside the city limits. Deputy Harrison was already on site to assist. When I got there, the deputy had already retrieved the body, maybe a day post-mortem at most. Some boys on four-wheelers had discovered him around sunset and called it in, but it had taken a few hours to locate. We positioned him supine, and I confirmed no pulse. The man was naked, about 5'9", average build, maybe late 30s or early 40s, and probably of Mexican descent. To begin with, his fingers were each over 10 inches long. Seemingly natural bone structure, just elongated. Also on both shoulders were small protrusions, bumps maybe an inch or two tall beneath the skin like massive knuckles, where the clavicle connects to the scapula. But that's not what concerned me most. The top of this man's cranium had been opened up and closed again with staples running down the crest of his skull. The wound was fresh and pink beneath the hair, which had not been shaved before the incision was made. That's why I had failed to notice it initially, but my flashlight caught and reflected back the coagulated blood that was matting to the hair. That and the shine of the staples. It reminded me of a post-mortem, but I was fairly certain the incision had been made prior to death. Actually, I was certain. We loaded him into the van, and I took him back to the morgue. The next morning, he was gone. I got paperwork saying he had been transferred to Denver under jurisdictional priority, whatever that means. That was the last I heard of it officially. I know Stanley has heard other things, and I've heard the stories, but I cannot and will not comment on that. Actually, I will. They seem preposterous, and I do not believe them. Whatever genetic abnormality that John Doe had is not cause to go off the conspiratorial deep end. There are a lot of stranger things in nature than long fingers. Get over it. I can't speculate on the staples, other than to hope that that man found his end quickly and with little pain, because frankly it looked awful and I wish I could unsee it. Thank you for making me rehash this whole thing once again, though, and good day. The Institute of Human Observation, Wendell Cummings, Sanitation and Disposal, San Antonio, Texas, March 20th, 1996. I'm happy to talk with you, but I don't think I'll be of much help. I was just starting my shift that night and there was some kind of obstruction at one of the intakes. They had to shut down the flow and let it drain before we could see what the problem was. Sometimes you get bodies, it's just part of it, but I never seen one like this before. And don't underestimate what can happen after they dead too. I remember one old boy that was so bloated we thought he might pop like a balloon or one of those whales people find on the beach. Didn't that happen to some folks somewhere? Whale guts everywhere? I don't know. Anyways, like I said, this was different. This old boy was fresh, but he had some fingers on him, let me tell you. 6 of them. 6 on each hand, no joke. And they must have been almost a foot long too. Weird looking, man. With an extra knuckle or something in there. Like spider's legs. Spider hands or something. I don't know. Crazy. It was also his eyes, big and black. Must have been a head wound or something. Think they call that an 8-ball hemorrhage? You'd know better than me. Those eyes did seem bigger than normal. 6 long fingers and big eyes. But beyond that, the guy seemed human. Dead, but human. Nah, the eyes were normal shape, just bigger. I want to say like twice as big as normal, but I'm probably blowing it out of proportion. They couldn't have been that big. He did look weird though. I'm no doctor, I just had to get his ass out of there because he was clogging the system. We let the cops deal with everything else. They took him away. I don't know what happened after that. You're the only one that's ever asked me about it. I know word spread around here though. Called him an alien. I kept saying, but he wasn't green. Everybody knows they green. The Institute of Human Observation, Kyle Hastings, Kansas Highway Patrol, Richfield, Kansas, October 22nd, 1996. This was October 96. I was the first responder, overturned Chevy cargo van, looked to have rolled multiple times off the highway. This was on 27 west of Richfield. No other vehicles involved, no other persons on scene. No response from inside the vehicle when I approached. Driver was later found to be dead on impact. I knew right away though. The van was upside down and the whole driver's side was completely compacted down. You could tell someone was still in the seat and a part of all of it, but there's no way they could have survived. There was nothing left. The back cargo area was cordoned off with a steel cage, like it might have been a prisoner transport or something, but I can't confirm that. There was also a stretcher back there and someone was strapped to it. Now, there were no markings on this van, nothing to indicate an official or medical or emergency vehicle of any kind. Dispatch didn't have any info on any activity from outside jurisdictions in the area either. The back doors of the van were jammed from the rollover and I had to use a pry bar and was able to get one wedged open enough to squeeze inside. There's no way I was going to get the stretcher out, but I went in to check on the status of the individual strapped to it. They were dead. I assume they died in the crash. Now, I don't know what wounds were sustained during the crash, and some were fresh, but that wasn't what was concerning. It was one arm and one leg. They were already amputated or missing before the crash, I think, but it looked like they were growing back. They looked to have been healed, the round bulbous end you're used to seeing on an amputee, but then there was a thinner, stringy piece of arm and leg growing from the center of the stumps. Fibrous limbs, kinda, maybe what your arm would look like without skin and bone, maybe. But there were fingers and toes, too. There were nails starting to grow, for Christ's sake. I sat with the beam of my flashlight on them, just dumbstruck until the other units arrived. Perhaps this was a genetic thing or something, a birth defect? I don't know, but I've never seen anything like that, I can say that for sure. Those were not wounds or the result from the accident either. The tissue wasn't bleeding or damaged or anything. And this body was strapped and locked in. That was the other thing. This guy was strapped and locked in. You would have needed a key to get those straps off. I understand restraints can be necessary, but I've never seen a setup like this before. I was wedged into the back of that van just beside myself looking at this body on this stretcher when the other units arrived. They were just as taken aback as I was. Hadn't seen anything like it either. We followed procedure and in the end the bodies were transferred away. I don't even think Ed, the coroner, saw either the driver or the guy on the stretcher. Beyond the 2 limbs, the only thing that was concerning was the wound on his temple. Once again, there were injuries due to the crash, but this wound must have been sustained since before that, because there were staples used to close it. The incision was on this man's left temple, maybe 3-4 inches long, basically from his eye to his ear, with big old staples closing it up. Didn't look great. No, the fingers on his normal arm were ordinary size as far as I could tell. His eyes were closed, but nothing seemed out of the norm on his face beyond that wound on the temple. Was probably in his 20s, white male, clean-cut looking guy. For some reason he made me think of a Marine, but I have nothing to base that on. That's it. That's all they say. Just the one statement per sheet. I don't know what to make of them. The wooden box and files are in the other room. Like I said, these are just the top 3. The thing's full. Other kinds of reports too. Certainly no conclusions from what I read though. Strange, dark stuff. Makes you wonder.